I was a flower growing wild and free. All I wanted you to be my sweet honeybee. If I was a tree growing tall and green, all I wanted you to shade me and be my leaf.
This is Billy Earl on DELMARVELOUS Americana, and we are thrilled to be in beautiful downtown Burtonsville with an old friend of mine from elementary school. We go back that far. Barry Lewis Polisar has been writing and performing music for many, many years. His career became on steroids with the movie Juno. Let's talk a little bit about that, because as I understand it, it was Ivan Reitman who was the director there?
No, it was his son, Jason Reitman.
Jason, that's
Jason
right,
Reitman. Jason Reitman.
He was looking for some music.
He was looking for a song with a different title, and in a dyslexic moment typed in "You Are the One I Want," and on iTunes discovered my song, "All I Want Is You."
Okay.
And had never heard it before, played it, liked it, called me up, emailed, I think, and said, "Hey, I'd like to put this in my movie." And I joke, I said, "How much do I have to pay you?" And he said, No, we pay you."
That's
I said,
funny.
Great. But there's actually a backstory to that, and that is, I was very late making the transition from records to cassettes, and even later making the transition from cassettes to CDs. And when I finally decided, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, because it actually relates to another story that involves you, but I went at one point in my career, I went back to my old recordings, the songs and the albums that I made in the mid '70s, and I didn't have a budget for those early albums, and 20 years later, I went back and said, "Okay, I'd like to re-record some of these with a little bit more music."
Yeah.
I now know how to play, guitar better. I can tell now when my guitar is out of tune, which I didn't in those early albums. I mean, they were really, they were just like of their times. And when I went back and re-recorded those songs, I also tinkered with some of the lyrics. I updated them. I made them more in tune with modern sensibilities as a parent. And anyway, I had a whole series of albums I was going to release at one time onto CD. And there was a company out in Oregon, CD Baby, you may have heard about it. And at the time it was owned by Derek Sivers, who founded the company. And it was the preeminent CD distribution company.
They did my product.
Okay, so their specialty was independent music. And I called the guy up and I said, I've got like 6 new albums that I want to release at one time. I'd love to get some distribution. And the guy went, "Barry Lewis Polisar? I can't believe this, but before I ever formed this company, I worked as a clown in a circus, and I sang your songs every day. I feel like I owe you royalties for 3 years. I would love to have your line of albums, but not just your new albums. I want all those old albums also from the 70s, because those are the ones I remember." And because he took those old albums, and then ultimately, once they were on CD Baby, they ended up on iTunes, and that's when Jason Reitman heard them on iTunes. And I wondered, like, if it hadn't been for that quirk of him knowing my music and wanting the old albums probably would not have ever been distributed. I would have still had them in print, but I would have been pushing the newer things. And as a matter of fact, when Jason Reitman pitched me for that song, I said, "Well, I have a newer version of that song where I'm actually singing on key." And I sent him a copy of it, and he said, No, I like the old rough version. That's the one I want to use. And that's how that song happened. And of course, I'd already had a career 30 years on. In fact, I remember one of the headlines in the newspaper said, "Overnight success after 30 years."
Yep.
And for 30 years, I had made a pretty successful career performing in schools, and libraries, art museums, a dozen and a half albums, a bunch of books. But having the song in Juno achieved something that I could never do on my own, and that was international recognition.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty well known, certainly in Maryland, where I'm from, and certainly in the U.S., where my albums got distributed. But I wasn't sort of certainly a household name, and certainly not overseas. And so what Juno did is it put my songs on everybody's radar, and that just is something I could never have done. I have, between my books and my albums and my CDs, I have maybe about just under 500,000 books and albums in circulation, which is not bad for a single person doing my own thing. But the Juno soundtrack went platinum in like 2 months.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's just no way a small independent can compete with that kind of exposure. And that's what Juno did. It gave me the exposure that being kind of, like a household name.
Yeah.
So and people don't necessarily know my name, but they know the song.
My experience has been, for instance, on the way down here, I was talking to a couple of different people. One of whom is he was my very best friend when I lived in Texas.
Okay.
He is from Salisbury.
Oh, okay.
And he grew up not far from where I live. But anyway, we were political guys. When I was working for Bill White, he was running for governor against Rick Perry.
Okay.
He was standing behind me, and I was trying to explain to somebody where I was from. I was from College Park, Maryland. And I hear this voice behind me say, "Oh, yeah, we got some Western Shore trash here." And that was the introduction to Herb Keener. He's a Union thug. As a matter of fact, he was kind enough to get a shirt made for me that said Union Thug. But he did all the heavy lifting when we needed signs and we needed people and we needed, people from CWA.
Okay.
Anyway, so I'm on the phone with him. He knows exactly who you are. Now, he's a music guy, and he has children, but he knows exactly who you are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I often worried when Juno came out, and it had so much exposure, and then commercial companies started using the song, in ads. Was I losing my bad boy street cred? like all the people that knew my work as a small, independent, irreverent, funny singer-songwriter, because most of my songs are not like the song in Juno. In other words,
that's right.
Every album I would put one or two sweet, childlike love songs on the album to kind of balance the funny stuff. Underwear's everywhere, but mostly underneath, or I don't want to go to school, or I've got a teacher, she's so mean. And that's really what I've been known for. Don't Put Your Finger Up Your Nose, a song I wrote in the late 70s. And there's certain songs that are everybody's favorites.
Yeah.
And suddenly I became known for this other group of songs, which I had been recording all along. Me and You, which has actually been on more commercials than All I Want Is You.
Really?
Overseas, in Europe, in Australia, and New Zealand, Mexico. That song was on my first album. That song actually predated even me writing for kids. And I think All I Want Is You was the same way. I think I had that song. I don't know if you read about it. I had my first album had 19 songs, and second album I had about 15 or 16 songs, and I felt like I needed like one or two more songs.
Okay.
And I had this extra song laying around, which was All I Want Is You.
Really?
And I said, that kind of got a childlike quality to it. Let me throw that on as filler.
Okay.
At the last minute. And that's what I did. I almost didn't record the song, and it really was filler. And of course the fun part about that song for me that very few people know, because they only know it through the Juno song, it was the last song on, I think, side one of the album, my second album, and when the album ended, there was like a minute of silence as the needle would go around the record, and then all of a sudden this old cranky voice came in that said, if you were a cow, I'd be your udder. If you were a candle, I'd be the wick. And if you were a doctor, I'd be sick. If you were the ball, I'd be the chain. And it was sort of like I was mocking my own song, and that kind of made it funny. And I always remember a friend of mine up in New York I had just put the album out, and she was listening to it, and the song All I Want Is You ended, and she said, "Boy, Barry, that's such a sweet song. That's that's so unlike you and all your other songs. And then that voice
And then that came
on, and then she cracked up and said, okay, I get it now. I get it now. Yeah.
That's amazing. Now you were born in New York.
Born in Brooklyn. My family moved to Maryland. Gosh, I was about 7 or 8 years old, I guess, when we moved down, and lived in Silver Spring with my grandparents for a while, and then ended up in Adelphi. My folks bought a house in Adelphi.
Did you live over near Linda Blatt and Jimmy Reed and that part of Adelphi?
No, I was right on Powder Mill Road.
Okay.
Not too far from Knollwood. And in fact, I don't know if you remember Mary Swiggy from high school. So Mary lived in our neighborhood. I remember she was originally from California, and I remember like it was yesterday the day she arrived in I think it was 7th or 8th grade civics class. She was introduced as a girl from California, and I'd known Mary since junior high.
Okay.
Like you, but wasn't especially close with her. But I remember at the end of school, 1972, summer of 72, we were about to graduate, and I discovered that she lived kind of like in a neighborhood. Like, we were on Powder Mill Road, so it wasn't really a neighborhood.
Okay.
But there was a neighborhood about a mile away. And so one day I walked down to knock on her door and say hello, and we just started chatting. What are your plans? I really wasn't so clear what I was going to do next, but she was off to college, and she knew what her degree was going to be in. And I made a comment. I said, well, the one thing I would love to do is I'd love to go out west and see the West at some point. And she said, oh, my family's going to Arizona next Friday. Want to come with us? Well, it's one thing for a 17-year-old to say that. She gets up, she goes in the kitchen. She says, Barry's never traveled much. Can he come with us? And her folks said, why, sure. And I'm like going, really? What? Really? So they took me on their family vacation to Arizona.
How cool.
And her dad and mom had rented a cabin on the top of Mount Lemmon outside of Tucson because her older brother, Dean, was graduating from the University of Arizona in Tucson. And her oldest brother, Mark, and his wife, Kathy, were coming down from Seattle, and they were all converging on this mountaintop in Mount Lemmon. The important part of the story is every night, without a TV, without a radio, they'd bring out her two older brothers would bring out their guitars and sit around the fire and play music. Now, I've been around people who played guitar and played music a long time, but they played Chris Christopherson and John Prine and Bob Dylan.
The good stuff.
And all the people that I love.
Yeah.
And I came back from that trip, and I bought a guitar and adopted myself into their family. And for
Wonderful.
the next 2 years, I would just grab my guitar in the afternoon after I would work or after school, and I'd walk down to their house. We'd play guitar until it was dinner time. I'd stay for dinner, and then we'd play guitar till the evening. And literally for probably 2 years, I played music with them almost every night.
Wow.
And her two older brothers. And that was really the start and the beginnings of a lot of that. And it was nice because when her dad died, she was living in Arizona, and another family member was. I mean, their family was spread out, but he was buried here. His ashes were buried here, and so the whole family came back and stayed with us, and we actually had the memorial service reception here at our house. It was kind of a complete full circle moment, which was nice.
Did they show you a lot of their tricks, their guitar tricks?
They did. Mark. I mean, I'm still real close with the family still, and Mark often jokes that they learned a few things, and I just kind of went with those few things. I joke that my first album I only knew 4 chords when I recorded the first album, and I only used 3 of them because I didn't want to show off. The truth is not too far from that, but I mean. I never really grew a lot as a musician. I was always more of a songwriter.
Right.
I was always interested in the words. I always interested in poetry. It's not ironic that I have a corollary career as an author and a poet for kids. So my interest in fact, the people that I like, Guy Clark and Robert Earl Keen and Townes Van Zandt and Dylan, they're all songwriters. They're wordsmiths.
Oh, you're speaking my language here, brother.
Well-crafted songs. And so I never really grew. I mean, I play guitar better than I used to, but
Yeah.
I'm more of a songwriter, and nothing gives me more pleasure when I hear other covers of my songs by
Right.
other people, which is great. So yeah, they did show me a few tricks, and actually. A couple years back, Dean passed away from Parkinson's, Mary's middle brother, and just before he died, the family was here staying with us again, and Mark had a guitar, and I brought mine, and we went to the center where the hospice place where Dean was, and we went outside in the courtyard, and brought our guitars and kind of played those songs again, which is a kind of a touching moment.
Yeah.
At least for me, it was. But yeah.
What was your first guitar?
My first guitar is hanging up in my office. It was a $45 nylon classical guitar, and I learned how to. I still use it when I write songs because it's got a real wide fretboard and it's easy to play.
Yeah.
Because it's nylon strings. Then when I actually started performing, I actually bought a 12-string Nagoya guitar, a Japanese guitar, 12-string, and I recorded my first couple albums with that 12-string guitar. I now have a 6-string Gibson, a large body Gibson.
Oh yeah,
that's the one.
Is that a Hummingbird?
No, it's not a Hummingbird. I don't think it's called a Hummingbird. There's a J. I don't even know what it's
Pretty
called.
guitar.
It's a guitar that Townes Van Zandt used to play, and Emmylou Harris. It's a big body guitar.
Oh yeah. It's got the little mustache down there.
It has
a
mustache and it's a decorative pick, but of course years of playing has kind of wiped away most of the decoration on the pick guard there. But yeah, no, it's a great sounding guitar, and because most of my programs are in schools or libraries, I'm lucky to have one microphone set up.
Right.
And so I needed a guitar. That's why I used to play the 12-string. It had this big, nice, full amplified sound, and the Gibson has that same thing. It really carries. And every now and then I get a treat of being able to play in an old auditorium that has wood walls. And that
nice
Gibson
acoustics,
reverberates with the sound. It's like the whole room becomes a sound body. You know?
Yeah.
It's really nice.
When you were first getting started, now you're picking up guitar and you're already writing poetry. I'm guessing.
Well, I began writing. I always used to write poems and stories from a very early age, but they weren't. I mean, I wouldn't have certainly described myself as a poet. I just always enjoyed writing. When I started writing songs, they were really. I mean, I can go back and say, okay, this is the song that was influenced by Leonard Cohen, and this is a song that was influenced by John Prine, and this is the song that was influenced by Bob Dylan. All I Want Is You. I know exactly what my influence is. It was a Roger Miller song called Reincarnation. If I was a bird and you was a fish, what would we do? I guess we'd wish for reincarnation. And Bob Dylan's You Ain't Going Nowhere. Tomorrow's the day my bride's gonna come. And those were clearly influences on if I was a flower growing wild and free, all I wanted you to be, my sweet honeybee. First of all, the grammar's wrong. It should be if I were a flower growing wild and free. But that's the way I recorded it, and anyway. But yeah.
There will be no grammar tests
I know.
on this paper.
Well, it's interesting. The later recording has the correct grammar, but again, the older version is the one that everybody knows.
So you woke up one morning and said, I need something to do, or I like doing this?
No, I've always loved music. I mean, all through high school, which we graduated in 1972, they were pretty political times, and I was influenced a lot by the singer-songwriters of the day, not just Bob Dylan, but Tom Paxton and Phil Oakes, a lot of the protest singers of that era. And I think a lot of my early songs, certainly on my early album, were kind of protest songs for kids.
Okay.
The album was called I Eat Kids and Other Songs for Rebellious Children. And the second album was My Brother Thinks He's a Banana and Other Provocative Songs for Kids.
The I Eat Kids is the one that my newest grandchild likes.
Okay.
Little Audra Lee. She's that big. She just turned 3.
Oh, great.
And Lexi, my daughter, plays your stuff around there. She's got it on her feed, on the Alexa feed. And the kids just love it. Now, they don't know that I'm here because let me think when I last spoke to her. Oh, we had a transactional thing. She went to Miami as my cousin was here. He was showing a piece of his art at the Renwick.
Okay.
And it was a very cool thing. And she was just so upset that she wasn't going to be here. But it was the first time that she and her husband were getting away from the kids in forever. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't tell her that I was coming over here, but she'll be the first one to see this.
Great, good.
Biggest fan.
I
But
like
you're developing a sense of what you can do in the entertainment field.
Well, so even my beginnings were really very, very organic. I didn't set out to have a career doing this. I went to college to be a teacher. I had planned on. I always loved literature. I always loved film. I always loved poetry. I always loved stories and the different ways of telling stories. You know, a good film tells a story.
Yes.
If you look at what's happening on the edges of the screen. And so I went to school to be a teacher. That's what I planned. And while I was at the University of Maryland, a student teacher saw me with my guitar and asked me if I'd ever performed for kids. I had worked at a camp a summer before.
Okay.
And I said, well, I did this camp thing and kind of was familiar with really little kids. Well, she taught older kids, and would I consider coming in and doing a program for the students?
Okay.
And I said, no, I've never done anything like that before. You want me to...
It's okay, baby.
Okay. I said, no, I've never done anything like that before. You want me to stand up on a stage in front of 500, older elementary school kids and sing songs and share my music? But she talked me into doing it. And I had about 3 weeks before the show was scheduled, and I looked around at music for kids. And there was a lot of nursery rhymes, a lot of songs for toddlers and babies, and then there was rock and roll and top 40, and there wasn't really anything that really, to me, spoke
storytelling,
to kids,
yeah,
that talked about their experiences. And so I actually wrote a couple songs in anticipation of that very first visit. The very first song I specifically wrote for kids was I'm a three-toed, triple-eyed, double-jointed dinosaur. I mean, just a tongue twister of a song. And I went and did this show armed with these handful of songs, and I was going to talk about writing and how I wrote. And after the assembly, I was supposed to go into the library and visit with a group of kids,
right,
and talk about being a writer and like what makes a good song. And I mean, it was kind of funny when I think about it, because I was really just at the very beginning of that stage. But as soon as the show was over, a bunch of kids came up to me on stage. Mr. Polisar, where did you get those songs? You wrote the songs? How do you write a song? Where do you get your ideas from? What do you do when you want to write? I mean, they were asking me these great questions that I had hoped I would get in the workshop. But of course, this was like an immediate response from the energy of the show. And then all of a sudden, a teacher walked in from the back of the room. She wasn't at the assembly. She came to collect the kids at the end. And she saw that they were up by the stage talking to me, and she started screaming at them. What are you talking for? This is an assembly program. You're not here to have a good time. Wipe those grins off your faces. You're acting just like children. Well, I often say that part of being a good writer is being a good listener. Mm-hmm. Part of being a good writer is observing the things around you, kind of looking for insights in your own world. And I realized that what she was saying would just make a great song. And I copied down everything she said. Wipe that grin off your face, you're acting like a child. And I wrote a song called I've Got a Teacher, She's So Mean. And I actually wrote 2 other songs because while I was getting ready to do the show, I went to the bathroom, and there was a little boy in the bathroom, and he was just kind of standing around. And I said, is everything okay? You all right? He said, yeah, I just don't have my homework, and I'm just hanging out in the bathroom because I don't have my homework. And I said, well, there's going to be an assembly in about 5 minutes. I think you should go.
Right.
You'll really enjoy it. So I wrote a song called I Don't Believe You're Going to the Bathroom. And then I wrote a third song called Shut Up in the Library, because I was supposed to go to the library. And anyway, I doubled my repertoire overnight. And then, of course, what happened was teachers heard that I had written this song. I was going to be a teacher. A lot of my friends were teachers. Some of them were already student teachers. They called me up. Is this Barry Lewis Polisar? Is it true that you wrote a song about a mean teacher? Well, I'm a teacher, and I want to know. can you come to my school and sing that song? True. So it was a people before profit venture. I think the album cost me about $2, and I think I sold it for $4, thinking I'd have to sell 500 copies to break even, and anything above that I'd make a little bit. And I sold out, so I took the money that I made on the first album and I turned it around and made a second album because I didn't want to keep the money. I wanted to like play it forward. In my mind, I was sort of doing this sort of people before profit vision, but the truth is it's business 101. Yeah. You take the profits from the year before and you move it into something else, and that's kind of what happened every year. The albums did well. Of course, if they didn't do well, I wouldn't have continued. It would have been a 1 or 2 album career. It would have started and stopped as soon as it began, and that's pretty much how I did it for years. 75 was the first album, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82. Took a little bit of a break. Then we had kids, and then I did an album. This is, where is it? Somewhere in this pile here. Juggling Babies in a Career, an album of songs about our kids, about toddlers, and then I had that experience in Anne Arundel County where a high school music teacher objected to my songs and tried to have me banned, and when that was finally over, and I mean that was a year or two of a pretty intense period for me. I don't think I realized it while I was going through it, but I was talking to the press all the time. I was being interviewed. I was talking about censorship, and I lost a lot of work. A lot of schools stopped booking me because it was a big controversial issue. Yeah. Then the White House under George Bush the Elder hired me to perform, and the headlines were "Singer in local county to perform at White House," and the story, the headlines began again, and I finally got reinstated. The school board said, "Okay, you can go back in." I kind of won that.
How would you categorize this teacher's criticism of it? Did he just looked at the titles?
No, he heard. Well, first of all, he was a high school music teacher, okay, and he was the head of the curriculum development department. So his idea was, he was there as a music teacher, as a high school music teacher. He was listening for scales and what the albums were communicating. And I said at the time, my record should have been reviewed by a librarian or by a reading specialist, because I was mostly a literary songwriter. Yeah. So I wasn't really doing much musically. I was really creating songs and stories, and that was really more of the dominion of reading teachers and librarians. So as a music teacher, he felt my stuff was inappropriate, and truthfully, I think he was coming from a liberal point of view. I mean, there's a kind of mystique that this was a conservative attack on my music, but I'm not entirely sure. I think really he thought that my songs might upset kids who might take my ideas literally and not have the sophistication to realize that I was being funny or being humorous. And I remember this. I was doing media interviews every day, and at one point I was interviewed by one of the morning zoo shows out of Baltimore. Okay. And the guy got me up at 5:30 in the morning to interview me about this Anne Arundel County ban of my work. And I was talking to him for a few minutes, and he said, "Well, hold on a minute. We have Mr. Horner on the other line." And I'm going, "Oh no, I've just been ambushed." They're going to have his point, and they're going to attack me. And he said, "Well, we just feel in Anne Arundel County that some of Mr. POLISAR songs, as sophisticated as they might be misunderstood by young children." And there was a pause, and then the disc jockey said, "You got that, kids? Anne Arundel County educators think you're too stupid to get the jokes." And I went, "Woo, okay, I'm safe. And so at that point,
did he hang up on you?
No, he didn't hang up. We had a couple more conversations, but they just felt my work would just be misinterpreted and might affect kids. You know, and this was also in the year that Two Live Crew was on trial for obscenity in Florida. Dennis Barry was on trial in Ohio for showing the Mapplethorpe photographs that were inappropriate. Jesse Helms was really on the rampage with all of the things. And so suddenly along comes Barry Lewis Polisar singing "Don't Put Your Finger Up Your Nose" or "Never Cook Your Sister in a Frying Pan," which, if you're going to take those songs literally, not bad advice.
Excellent advice.
Never cook your sister in a frying pan. Don't put your finger up your nose. But so anyway, I got reinstated, and truthfully, it was also the Arts Council, because he called up the Arts Council and said, you know, I'm with the Board of Education, and we've reviewed Mr. Polisar's work on albums, and we feel it is inappropriate. And it was the Art Council that caved. The Art Council pulled me off their list.
Okay.
Now, the irony of ironies is back then, we're talking 3 other lifetimes already, 35 years ago, I didn't work much in Anne Arundel County in those years.
Okay.
And I was going to actually drop out of the showcase until they called me to say, you've been removed from the showcase.
Yeah.
And then the hair on my back went up, and I went, wait a minute, what do you mean I've been removed from the showcase? And of course, you know, a friend of mine used to do PR, and she said, would you mind if I let the Washington Post know about this? And I said, Gail, you know, the Washington Post hasn't even reviewed my last 5 albums. I mean, they're not interested. Well, they were they were interested, and they did a front page art story, then got picked up in the Baltimore Sun. Then the ACLU saw it and called me up for a meeting and said, we'd like to fight this because this is really a First Amendment rights story. And I tell the story, you know, when I finally got reinstated and I came back into the schools, and I was thinking, this is my first show back in Anne Arundel County. Do I say anything about this? And I said, these are kids. I don't need to politicize my show. But I did my song "Underwear." And the last line of "Underwear" is, "Underwear with lots of holes is a sorry sight. Look around and try to see who's wearing theirs too tight." And when I hit that line, every teacher in the auditorium stood up and gave me a standing ovation. And I realized, wow, this was not just about me. This was about their ability to teach what they wanted to teach, to share what they wanted to share. And so it was worth the trip. But the story that I'm saying is that having finally been reinstated and gotten back into the schools, I looked at my old albums and I said, you know, these albums were recorded 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. You know, humor changes over time. Sensibilities change over time. Listen to Alice's Restaurant now. I mean, there are things in it that you go, I mean, especially humor albums. If you listen to any of those humor albums from the 60s or 70s, you know, you'd wince at some of the things. And my album suffered from some of that same thing, that I wouldn't write a song like that now. I mean, when I was 19, 20 years old in the 70s, yeah, that was funny. And a good example of that is, I'm giving you cuts for when the gunshots go on. So a good example of that is when I have a song called "Our Dog Bernard," and there's a line, it's about a dog who runs away from home, and he ran off with the milkman. I mean, who knows what a milkman is anymore, you know? He's living with her now, I hear, spends all his time down in darkened barrooms, smoking cigarettes and drinking beer. Well, it was a funny line when I wrote it, and it was a metaphor for and he was going to the dogs. Yeah. And I used to sing that song, and everybody would laugh. The kids would laugh. The parents would laugh. There's a dog drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. It's funny. But you say that now, and it's substance abuse. You can't do that. I have a picture in one of my poetry books, Insect Soup. There's a poem about a dung beetle. And the illustration is great. I don't know if you can see that. And the poem is very short. There's reason for discretion, so let us be discreet. No need for explanation. Just say, it likes to eat. And I was out in Indiana doing a concert, and the librarian came up to me and said, we can't share your insect book. And I went, why? And she said, well, the first poem is about a dung beetle, and the picture shows a dung beetle carrying a tray, and next to that tray is a glass that is probably wine. And we have a big substance abuse problem in our schools, and we don't want to do anything that might encourage kids to drink wine. And I said, well, you realize that he's also carrying a pile of dung on that. I mean, I don't think that this would encourage children to drink wine. I mean, if anything, it's anyway. So I have a million stories. I have a million stories like that. I was up in and it's not just in regions of the country where you would think. I was in New Hampshire, and I was met at my assembly with a group of parents who walked into the back of the room taking notes the whole time, and discovered after the show that the janitor in the school had seen a display case that the school set up about me coming to do my program, and it said, he's wickedly satiric. And the janitor thought it said wickedly satanic, reported to his church that the school was bringing in an avowed wickedly satanic songwriter, and they had a whole committee formed, and they were all taking notes, and of course there was nothing satanic about the show, except I do have a Halloween book, but that's really about my wedding. Anyway, I just a million stories like that, but anyway, so after the whole ban was over, I looked at my work, the old songs, and I said, first of all, they were recorded on a dime, very rudimentary albums. Here it is, 20 years later. Let me just re-record my favorite songs. Some of the songs just don't play well anymore. Other songs have stood the test of time. Some songs maybe need a little tinkering just to make them more viable for current generations. So I went back in the studio. That's how I ended up doing a whole series of albums on CD all at once. I did all my animal songs on an album called Old Dogs, New Tricks, an album of family songs called Family Trip, and school songs on an album called Teacher's Favorites. And it gave me the opportunity to tinker with some of the lyrics. I didn't real fine line. I didn't want to self-censor myself, but I also wanted to make the songs viable for. I didn't want my old material to be relegated to the dustbins of the archives, people who just liked the work because it was archival. And that's how those new albums kind of came about. I mean, I took the old songs and rehashed them. Of course, the joke was on me when it's all the old versions that are making its way on TV commercials and in the movies. I mean, it's all the old versions of the songs, not the new polished versions.
Any thoughts of doing that again?
You mean like it's been 20 years later? I do think about that. Like, I mean, so for instance, on the song I was talking about before, Our Dog Bernard, the original line was, it was changed to he ran off with the bus driver, is living with him now, I'm told, spends all his time watching television, getting fat and growing old. And I thought, well, that could be used in update. Another example of an old song, also on that first album that your kids had, Early Sunday Morning. Two kids get into a big food fight. And I had a great time re-recording it because I changed the melody, and it was real. I mean, musically, the new albums are just head and shoulders above the others in terms of their sophistication. And mostly it's my friend Ray Tokens, who was the engineer and the guitar player and the bass player, and he did these musical flourishes and ear snacks that are just amazing. But the original version, when the parents discover that the kids have completely trashed the house, there was a line, "Mommy was angry and Daddy got the strap. And they didn't tell us stories when they put us on their laps." Again, when I wrote it, it was taken as a metaphor. The kids got in trouble, they got punished. Yeah. But boy, getting the strap now has such a different meaning. Time changes things. So the new line reflected the way we parented. Daddy was angry, Mom yelled some more at us. She said we had to clean up, there was nothing to discuss. It's a much more modern line. Right. So what I find now is people, new parents, kids, who are coming to my material in the post-Juno era, like the new stuff, the musically produced. It's lots of ear snacks. People that grew up on my stuff, they like the originals that they grew up with, and it bears out what you said about your own kids. I have experienced that myself with albums that I had. I can actually quote song lyrics from songs from albums that I had when I was growing up. 50, 60 some years later, I can still remember every nuance and every line. And when I hear that the artist has re-recorded the song, go, yeah, okay, it might be musically better, but I sure do like the old version that I'm so accustomed to, because you get into the groove, and you remember, you come to expect every drum beat, and every bass note.
I have not matured musically since the 70s.
Yeah.
So when you go into the studio now, it's you and this is Ray you're talking about?
Well, Ray Tookins, he used to live actually right in near Fulton, so it was real close, and he had a home studio, and I did actually I started working with him. On the Juggling Babies album. We worked together. At that point, he was mostly an engineer. He did a couple little guitar pieces, but I brought in my cadre of friends who played different instruments. And when we were mixing the album, he said, that guitar part's really stepping on your vocals. I mean, he really had an ear to know what worked and what didn't work. Yeah. And so when I did subsequent albums, I did a live album that he taped at a community college up in Harford County, and then he sound sweetened it with bass and lead guitar, so it sounded like I had a trio up there, but it was just me and the guitar when I recorded it. And then when I did those albums, the old songs reimagined, I said, Ray, I'm basically coming in to do covers of my own work. Right. And I've changed tunes, I've changed melodies. Some I've kept the melodies. There were a couple songs. The only thing I changed was the title. I mean, the only thing I kept original was the title. The one song on the first album, Barnyard Stomp, was just a little kind of throwaway piece. I mean, just kind of images and Barnyard Stomp. And with a reference to Led Zeppelin's Barnyard Stomp from one of their albums. But then I kept that title, and I ended up... Actually, it was a funny story. My son told me the story that Barnyard Stomp was actually a song that Jimmy Page, or Robert Plant, I think it was Jimmy Page, had actually written about his dog, which I did not know. So taking that title, I actually wrote a song about our dog called Barnyard Stomp. I kept the title, but I wrote a new song. It's a completely new song, and it's about our dog. I was a flower growing wild and free. All I wanted you to be my sweet honeybee. If I was a tree growing tall and green, all I wanted you to shade me and be my leaf.